I'm 65 years old now, and for 40 years, I've been keeping the biggest secret imaginable. In the basement of my house, hidden from the world, lives a creature that the government has been searching for since before I was born. His name is Kale, at least that's what I call him, and he's an alien. I found him when I was 25 years old, dying near the wreckage of his spacecraft in the desert near White Sands in 1955, and I made a choice that day that changed both our lives forever. This is the story of how an ordinary man became the guardian of something extraordinary, and why I finally decided it's time to tell the truth. My name is Ryan Stevens, and in 1995, I was 65 years old, living alone in a small ranch-style house on the outskirts of Roswell, New Mexico. To my neighbors, I was just another retired aerospace engineer, a widower who kept to himself, tended his garden, and occasionally drove into town for supplies. They had no idea that I wasn't living alone. I'd never been alone, not since July 14, 1955. I was 25 years old that summer, fresh out of MIT with a degree in aerospace engineering, working at the White Sands Missile Range as a junior systems analyst. The Cold War was at its peak, and White Sands was at the forefront of American missile and rocket development. I was young, ambitious, and thrilled to be part of something important. The night of July 14th, I'd been working late, running calculations for an upcoming test launch. It was past midnight when I finally headed home, taking the long route through the desert on Highway 70. I preferred driving at night. The desert was cooler, emptier, peaceful under the vast New Mexico sky. That's when I saw the lights. At first, I thought it was an aircraft from the base, maybe an experimental craft I wasn't cleared to know about. But the movement was wrong, too erratic, too fast, defying physics as I understood them. The lights were brilliant, shifting from white to blue to colors I couldn't quite name, and they were descending rapidly about 2 miles off the highway. I should have kept driving. That would have been the smart thing, the safe thing. But I was 25 and curious, and I'd spent my whole education learning to investigate anomalies, not ignore them. I pulled off the highway onto a dirt road that headed in the direction of the lights. The crash site was smaller than I expected, a gouge in the desert sand about 30 feet long, ending in a metallic object partially buried in a shallow arroyo. The object was roughly the size of a Volkswagen Beetle, with a surface that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. It was intact, or mostly intact, with no visible seams or joints, as if it had been grown rather than built. I approached cautiously, my engineer's mind cataloging details even as my heart raced. The metal, if it was metal, was warm to the touch but not hot, despite what should have been a violent impact. There were symbols etched near what might have been a hatch, geometric patterns that looked almost like language, but weren't any alphabet I recognized. Then I heard the sound. It was faint, coming from inside the craft, a kind of rhythmic clicking or chirping, almost musical, and underneath it, something that might have been breathing, labored, and pained. The hatch, and it was definitely a hatch, I could see the outline now, was partially open, maybe damaged in the crash. I pulled at it, my hands finding unexpected purchase on what looked like a smooth surface, and it swung wide. The interior was dim, lit by a faint bioluminescence that seemed to come from the walls themselves. And huddled in what might have been a seat or control station was a being about 4 feet, 11 inches tall. I somehow immediately thought of him as was humanoid in the most basic sense, bipedal, 2 arms, a head. But that's where the similarities to human ended. His skin was a pale gray blue, smooth and almost translucent in places, showing what might have been a network of vessels underneath. His head was proportionally larger than a human's, with enormous eyes that were completely black, no visible iris or white. His fingers were long and delicate, with an extra joint compared to human hands. He was injured. I could see that immediately. A dark fluid, almost black in the dim light, was seeping from a wound on his left side. And he was conscious, those huge black eyes fixed on me with an expression I somehow recognized, despite the alien features, fear and desperate hope in equal measure. I knew in that moment that I had a choice. I could run back to my car, drive to White Sands, report what I'd found. The military would swarm this site within hours. This being would become a specimen, a subject for dissection and study, assuming he survived the rough handling that would certainly follow, or I could do something else. I still don't fully understand why I made the choice I did. Maybe it was the look in those eyes. Maybe it was something in his posture, the way he tried to make himself smaller, less threatening. Maybe it was remembering all the war stories my father had brought back from Europe about people hiding refugees, about choices made in darkness that defined character. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said, knowing he probably couldn't understand, but hoping tone would convey what words couldn't. "I'm going to help you." The being made that clicking sound again, softer now, and I realized it was coming from his throat, not from the ship. Communication, maybe, or just a sound of pain. I'm not a doctor, but I'd taken field medicine courses during my college ROTC training. I examined the wound as carefully as I could in the dim light. It looked like he'd been impaled by something during the crash, maybe part of the ship's interior. The bleeding was slow but steady. He needed help, real help, and I had no idea if human medicine would even work on his physiology. But I had to try. I had a first aid kit in my car, standard issue, nothing fancy. I ran back, grabbed it and a blanket from my trunk, and returned to find the being exactly where I'd left him. He'd made no attempt to leave the craft, though the hatch was wide open. Either he couldn't move, or he'd decided to trust me. I used the entire contents of the kit, bandages, antiseptic, tape, trying to stabilize the wound. The being's anatomy was different enough that I wasn't sure I was helping, but he didn't resist, just watched me work with those enormous, unreadable eyes. "We need to get you out of here," I told him as I finished. "By morning, someone's going to see this. Ranchers, military patrols, someone. And if they find you..." I didn't finish the sentence. We both knew what would happen. Getting him to my car was challenging. He could walk, barely, leaning heavily on me. He weighed less than I expected, maybe 80 pounds, light-boned, delicate. Up close, I could smell him, a scent like ozone and something else, almost metallic, but not quite. I wrapped him in the blanket, getting him into the back seat of my 1954 Chevrolet Bel Air and covering him as best I could. If anyone saw us, I'd claim I was transporting a sick friend. In the dark, wrapped in a blanket, he might pass for human. Might. The drive back to Roswell took 30 minutes. That felt like hours. I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting military vehicles, helicopters, something. But the desert stayed empty and dark. By some miracle, we made it to my rental house, a small 2-bedroom on the edge of town, without encountering anyone. I lived alone. My girlfriend had broken up with me 2 months earlier, unable to deal with the long hours and secrecy my job required. My parents were back in Massachusetts. I had no roommates, no frequent visitors. It was perfect in its way, perfect for hiding something that shouldn't exist. I got him inside and laid him on my bed, the only proper bed in the house. He'd lost consciousness during the drive, which worried me, but he was still breathing, a rapid, shallow pattern different from human respiration, but definitely breathing. I spent that first night watching him, changing his bandages, trying to get fluids into him. I had no idea what he could consume, but water seemed universal enough. He drank a little, those long fingers wrapped around the glass with surprising delicacy. By morning, I knew 2 things with absolute certainty. First, this being was intelligent. The way he watched me, the way he responded to my actions, the occasional sounds he made that seemed like attempts at communication. This was no animal. This was a person, just not a human person. Second, I couldn't let anyone know he existed. Not the military, not the government, not even my closest friends. because he wouldn't be treated as a person. He'd be treated as a specimen, a trophy, a threat. Maybe later, decades from now, humanity would be ready to meet another intelligent species with respect and compassion. But in 1955, in the middle of Cold War paranoia and the nuclear age, no chance. So I made the decision that would define the next 40 years of my life. I would hide him, protect him, and keep him secret until what? I didn't know. Until he healed and could leave? Until I died? Until the world changed enough that he might be safe. I called in sick to work that morning, claiming a severe flu. Over the next week, I used my saved vacation time and sick leave, staying home to care for my unexpected patient. The wound slowly healed, faster than a human wound would have actually, the flesh knitting together in ways that fascinated my engineer's mind. And as he healed, we began to communicate. He was intelligent, remarkably so. Within days, he was mimicking sounds, trying to reproduce English words with a voice box that wasn't designed for them. Within 2 weeks, we'd developed a rudimentary system of gestures and simple words. Within a month, he could understand most of what I said, even if he couldn't always produce the sounds to respond. I learned that his name, translated as closely as his vocal attempts could manage, was something like Kyle. I learned that he was a pilot or navigator or something like that. His gestures suggested someone who guided craft through space. I learned that the crash had been an accident, a malfunction he couldn't explain in our limited shared vocabulary, and I learned that he had no way to contact his people, no way to call for rescue. The craft was damaged beyond his ability to repair, and apparently beyond mine as well when I snuck back to the crash site a week later to find it already cordoned off by military vehicles. Whatever secrets it held were now in government hands. Kyle was stranded, trapped on Earth with no way home, and only one person in the world who knew he existed. Over the following months and years, we developed a routine. I modified the spare bedroom, adding blackout curtains and a lock on the inside, for his safety, not to imprison him. Cale understood the danger of being discovered. He stayed inside during the day when I was at work, occupying himself with books I brought home, television programs that helped him learn English, and various projects that kept his active mind engaged. He learned quickly, far faster than any human. Within a year, he could understand complex English, though speaking it remained difficult due to his physiology. We developed a hybrid communication system, simple spoken words supplemented by gestures, and eventually written notes. The decades passed in a strange rhythm. I married in 1962 a woman named Patricia who worked as a nurse at the local hospital. I didn't tell her about Kyle for 6 months, terrified of her reaction. When I finally did, after wrestling with guilt over keeping such a profound secret from my wife, her response surprised me. "Well," she'd said after a long silence, standing in the doorway of Cale's room while he watched us with those enormous dark eyes, "I suppose we'd better figure out what he can eat besides canned soup and crackers. That can't be healthy even for whatever he is." Patricia became Cale's guardian as much as I was. She brought medical knowledge, compassion, and a practical approach to the impossible situation we'd created. We had no children, a choice we made together, knowing that a child couldn't keep this secret, and we couldn't risk Cale's exposure. Patricia died in 1989, cancer taking her far too young at 58. Kyle mourned with me in his way. He'd spent 34 years with her, longer than many human friendships last. She'd been the only other person in the world who knew he existed, who saw him as a person rather than a secret. After her death, it was just Cale and me again. I retired from White Sands in 1990 at 60 years old after 35 years of service. My colleagues threw me a party, gave me a gold watch, told me I'd earned my rest. They had no idea that my real work, protecting and caring for Cale, would continue every single day. By 1995, we'd achieved something remarkable. 40 years of absolute secrecy. Kyle had never been seen by anyone except Patricia and me. Never photographed, never detected, never discovered. In an age of increasing surveillance and decreasing privacy, we'd managed to hide an extraterrestrial being in plain sight. But on November 3rd, 1995, our luck ran out. I was in the kitchen making lunch, grilled cheese sandwiches, something Cale had developed a taste for over the years, when I saw the black sedans pulling up to my house. 3 of them government plates, the kind of vehicles that meant official business, and no good news. 6 men in dark suits emerged, and I recognized the type immediately. Federal agents, probably DOD or one of the alphabet soup agencies that dealt with classified matters. The lead agent was in his 40s, with the kind of face that had seen too much and trusted too little. I met them at the door before they could knock. "Mr. Ryan Stevens?" the lead agent asked, already knowing the answer. "That's me." "I'm Agent Mitchell, Defense Intelligence Agency. We need to ask you some questions about your activities in July 1955, and we need to search your property. We have a warrant." He held up the paperwork, and my heart sank. This was it. After 40 years, the secret was about to end. "What's this about?" I asked, playing for time, my mind racing. "I think you know, Mr. Stevens," Agent Mitchell said. "We have evidence suggesting you removed classified material from a crash site near White Sands in 1955, material that belongs to the United States government." Behind me, I knew Cale was in his room, probably listening to every word. 40 years of protection, about to unravel, and I had no idea what would happen to him, to us, when these men discovered what I'd been hiding. The only thing I knew for certain was that I would protect Cale as I had for 40 years. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. Because that's what you do for family, even if that family came from another world. Agent Mitchell didn't wait for my invitation. He stepped past me into the living room, his 5 colleagues fanning out behind him with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this before. I watched them scan the room, the worn couch Patricia had picked out in 1975, the television set from the early 90s, the photos on the mantel showing a life that looked completely ordinary. "Mr. Stevens, we're going to need you to sit down while we conduct our search," Mitchell said, gesturing to the couch. "This will go more smoothly if you cooperate." "Am I under arrest?" I asked, remaining standing. "Not at this time, but that could change depending on what we find." He pulled out a small notebook. "Let's start with some questions. On the night of July 14th, 1955, you were employed at White Sands Missile Range, correct?" "That was 40 years ago," I said carefully. "I'd need to check my records to be certain of exact dates." "We have your employment records, Mr. Stevens. You called in sick for a week starting July 15th, claiming flu. Before that, you worked late and left the facility at approximately 11:47 p.m. Your security badge was logged out at that time." They'd done their homework. I watched 2 agents head down the hallway toward the bedrooms, my pulse quickening. Cale's room was the second door on the left, currently locked from the inside, as it always was when I had visitors, which was rare. "I don't remember the specifics of one night 40 years ago," I said. "I worked a lot of late nights back then." "This wasn't just any night," Mitchell continued. "This was the night a radar station detected an unidentified object traveling at impossible speeds before it disappeared from instruments near Highway 70. Military teams were dispatched at dawn and found evidence of a crash, scorched earth, unusual metal fragments, and tire tracks from a 1954 Chevrolet Bel Air. Your car, Mr. Stevens. We have the registration records." I felt sweat forming on my back despite the November chill. They had more than I'd feared, not just suspicions, but actual evidence connecting me to the crash site. "Agent Mitchell," one of the men called from the hallway. "This door's locked from the inside. We need the key." "I don't have a key for that room," I said, which was technically true. The lock was a simple sliding bolt, only accessible from inside. "It's been locked for years, just storage." "Storage for what?" Mitchell asked, his eyes narrowing. "Old papers, Patricia's things. I locked it after she died. Couldn't face going through it all." Mitchell studied me for a long moment. "Break it down," he ordered. "Wait." I started, but two agents were already positioning themselves at the door. "You have no right." "We have every right, Mr. Stevens. The warrant covers all structures and rooms on this property." I heard the first impact against the door, then the second. The bolt wouldn't hold long. It wasn't designed to withstand that kind of force. Inside that room was Cale. 40 years of secrecy and answers to questions humanity had been asking since we first looked up at the stars. The door splintered on the third impact, bursting inward. The two agents rushed inside, weapons drawn. There was a moment of absolute silence. Then I heard one of them speak in a voice that was trying very hard to stay professional. "Agent Mitchell, you need to see this." Mitchell moved quickly down the hall, and I followed despite an agent trying to stop me. I reached the doorway just as Mitchell stepped inside, and I saw his face transform, professional composure cracking into genuine shock. Kyle stood in the far corner of the room, exactly where I'd taught him to position himself if we were ever discovered, non-threatening, hands visible, making no sudden movements. The afternoon light from the window illuminated him clearly, leaving no doubt about what he was. "Jesus Christ," one of the agents whispered. "Nobody move," Mitchell commanded, though his voice was unsteady. He kept his eyes on Cale while speaking to me. "Mr. Stevens, what exactly is that?" "His name is Cale," I said quietly, stepping into the room despite the agent's protests. "And he's not a what, he's a person. He's been living here peacefully for 40 years. I walked slowly toward Cale, and he turned those enormous dark eyes to me. I could see the fear in them, but also something else, a kind of resignation, as if he'd always known this day would come. "It's okay," I told him, using the gentle tone we'd developed over decades. "Nobody's going to hurt you, right, Agent Mitchell?" Mitchell was still staring, his hand near his weapon, but not on it. That's an extraterrestrial biological entity, a living alien, in your spare bedroom." "His name is Cale," I repeated firmly. "And yes, he's from somewhere else. His craft crashed in 1955. He was injured. I helped him instead of turning him over to people who would have dissected him like a lab specimen." "You concealed evidence of extraterrestrial life for 40 years, Mitchell said, his professional training reasserting itself. "You removed government property from a crash site. "I saved a life," I interrupted, "and I protected a sentient being from becoming a prisoner, or worse. If that's a crime, then I'm guilty." Kyle made a soft clicking sound, and I turned to him. He gestured in the way we'd developed for safe and danger. "I don't know yet," I told him honestly, "but we're going to face this together." Mitchell pulled out a radio. "This is Mitchell. I need to speak to Director Hastings immediately. Secure line and send a full medical team. Biological containment protocols. Tell them," he paused, looking at Cale again, "tell them it's confirmed. We have a live EBE." Over the next hour, my house transformed into a command center. More vehicles arrived, medical units, military personnel, scientists in protective suits. They set up equipment in my living room, turned my kitchen into a communications hub, and basically occupied every space except Kyle's room, where he remained with me and two guards at the door. "We need to transport it to a secure facility," a woman in a biohazard suit was telling Mitchell in the hallway, her voice carrying into the room. "Full examination, documentation, assessment of any biological hazards." "His name is Cale," I said loudly enough for her to hear, "and he's not an it. He's intelligent, conscious, and has been living here without causing any harm for 4 decades. The woman approached the doorway, studying Cale with clinical interest. "Mr. Stevens, we appreciate your care of this entity. But surely you understand that this is a matter of national security, scientific importance. We need to study it properly." "Her," I corrected. "And no, you don't need to study him. You need to recognize him as a person with rights." "It's not human," the woman said flatly. "It has no rights under U.S. law." "Then U.S. law is wrong," I shot back. Agent Mitchell entered the room, and I noticed he'd holstered his weapon, a small but significant gesture. "Mr. Stevens, I understand you've formed an attachment over the years, but you have to see this from our perspective. This is the most significant discovery in human history. We can't just leave it in your spare bedroom." "Why not?" I challenged. "He's been here for 40 years without incident. He's not dangerous, not a threat. He's just trying to survive, same as anyone." Can he communicate?" Mitchell asked, looking at Cale with obvious curiosity beneath his professional demeanor. "Watch," I said. I turned to Cale and spoke clearly. "Cale, can you tell these people that you understand what's happening?" Cale looked at Mitchell, then at the other agents. His vocalization was difficult for human speech, but he'd learned over the years to produce certain sounds. "Understand," he managed, the words heavily accented but clear enough. "Fright, Enid." The room went silent. Mitchell's expression shifted again. I saw the moment when Cale stopped being a specimen and started being something more complex in his mind. "He's frightened," I said quietly. "After 40 years of safety, he's surrounded by armed strangers discussing him like he's property. How would you feel?" Mitchell knelt down slowly, bringing himself closer to Cale's eye level. "Can you understand me?" he asked. Cale nodded, a human gesture he'd learned from watching Patricia and me. "Are you being held here against your will?" Cale looked at me, then back at Mitchell. "Home," he said carefully. "Ryan, family, safe." I saw something change in Mitchell's face, a softening around the eyes. "Director Hastings is flying in from D.C., he said, standing. "He'll be here tomorrow morning. Until then, nobody touches anything or anyone. We maintain current status." He looked at his team. "That's an order. Mr. Stevens and the EBE and Cale stay exactly where they are." That night, with armed guards at my doors and scientists camped in my living room, I sat in Cale's room and tried to explain what would happen next, though I barely understood it myself. "Tomorrow more people come," I said. "Important people. They'll decide what happens to you, to us." Cale reached out with those long, delicate fingers and touched my hand, a gesture of trust and affection that had taken years to develop. 40 years, hide, he vocalized slowly. "Now, see. Scared." "Me too," I admitted. "But Cale, listen to me. You're not alone in this. Whatever happens, I'm with you. I didn't protect you for 40 years just to abandon you now." He made the clicking sound that I'd learned meant something like gratitude or affection. Outside, I could hear the agents talking, radios crackling, the machinery of government slowly turning. After 4 decades of silence, the secret was out. And I had no idea if the world was ready for it or if Cale would survive what came next. Director William Hastings arrived at 7:23 a.m. on November 4th in a black helicopter that landed in the empty field behind my property, scattering dust and dried tumbleweeds in its downdraft. I watched from the kitchen window as he emerged, a man in his late 50s with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected millions of people who would never know his name. I'd barely slept. The house had been full of agents all night, their presence a constant reminder that my life and Cale's had fundamentally changed. I'd stayed in Cale's room, sitting in the old chair by the window, watching him sleep in the strange way his species did, with those enormous eyes half closed but never fully shut, as if some part of him remained always alert. Agent Mitchell had been decent, all things considered. He'd allowed me to bring Cale food, the vegetarian diet we'd developed over the years, mostly fruits, vegetables, and grains that his system could process. He'd kept the scientists at bay when they'd wanted to start preliminary examinations immediately. But Mitchell answered to Hastings, and Hastings answered to people even higher up the chain of command. The director entered my house without knocking, flanked by Mitchell and 3 others I didn't recognize. He scanned the living room with sharp, assessing eyes, then focused on me. "Mr. Stevens, I'm Director Hastings, National Security Council Special Access Programs. I believe we have much to discuss." "I want a lawyer present," I said immediately, And I want assurances that Cale won't be harmed or transported against his will. Hastings raised an eyebrow. Kyle, you've named it. He named himself, I corrected. Or rather, that's as close as we can get to pronouncing his actual name. And before we go any further, I need those assurances. Mr. Stevens, you're not in a position to make demands. You've concealed the existence of an extraterrestrial being for 4 decades, violated numerous federal laws, and compromised national security. The only reason you're not in handcuffs is that we need your cooperation to manage this situation. Then you'll need to make assurances, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. Because I won't cooperate in anything that treats Kyle as government property or a lab animal. He's a person. He deserves rights. Hastings studied me for a long moment. Let me see him. I led him down the hallway to Cale's room, where the door now hung crooked on its hinges from yesterday's forced entry. Kyle was standing by the window, looking out at the desert landscape he'd observed through this same glass for 40 years, but had never been able to walk through freely. He turned as we entered, and I saw him assess Hastings immediately, the way he held himself, the authority in his bearing. Kyle had learned to read humans well over the decades. Kyle, I said gently, this is Director Hastings. He's the person who will decide what happens next. Hastings approached slowly, and I had to give him credit. There was curiosity in his expression, but not fear, not revulsion. Remarkable, he said quietly. After all the crashed crafts, all the debris we've recovered over the years, we've never had a living specimen. The Roswell incident in '47, the bodies were too damaged. Same with the others. But you're intact. Alive. Person, I interjected. Not specimen. He's a person. Hastings glanced at me. Can he understand English? Better than most humans, I said. His vocal cords can't produce all the sounds, but his comprehension is complete. Go ahead, ask him something. Hastings turned back to Cale. Do you understand what's happening? Why these people are here? Cale nodded slowly. Then, with obvious effort, he vocalized, found. After 40 years. Ryan, protected. Now, govern. Meant. The last word was particularly difficult for him, but the meaning was clear. How long have you been on Earth? Hastings asked. Kyle held up 4 fingers, then made a 0 shape with his other hand, repeating it. 40. Your craft crashed in 1955? A nod. Can you contact your people? Tell them where you are? Cale gestured at himself, then made a sweeping motion toward the sky, then shook his head. A gesture of impossibility we'd developed. No way to reach them. So you're stranded here, Hastings said thoughtfully. No way home. No way to communicate with your species. And Mr. Stevens has been hiding you all this time. He looked at me. Why? Why not turn him over to authorities? Think of what we could have learned. Think of what you would have done to him, I countered. It's 1955, the Cold War is at its peak, and you find an alien being. Would you have treated him as a person, or as a weapon, a threat, something to be dissected and studied until you extracted every possible secret? Hastings didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, you might be right. The climate was different then, but it's 1995 now, Mr. Stevens. We're more enlightened. We understand more about consciousness, about rights. No, do you? I challenged, because I heard your scientist yesterday calling him it and talking about full examinations and containment protocols. That doesn't sound enlightened to me. A voice came from the doorway. Agent Mitchell. Director, Dr. Sarah Chen from Johns Hopkins is here, the xenobiologist you requested. A woman in her early 40s entered, carrying a medical bag and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. Director Hastings, I came as soon as I got your call. Is it true? You actually have a living... She stopped when she saw Kyle, her eyes widening. Oh my God. Dr. Chen, this is Kyle, Hastings said. Kyle, this is Dr. Chen. She's a scientist who studies biology, life forms. She'd like to examine you, make sure you're healthy. Would that be acceptable? Cale looked at me, questioning. "It's your choice," I told him. "You don't have to agree to anything you're not comfortable with." "Just a basic examination," Dr. Chen said, approaching slowly. "Nothing invasive. I want to make sure you're okay, that you're not suffering from any medical issues. Is that all right?" Cale considered, then nodded slowly. Over the next hour, I watched Dr. Chen conduct the most professional medical examination I'd ever witnessed. She narrated everything she was doing, asked permission before each step, and treated Kyle with a respect that made my estimation of her rise considerably. She checked his cardiovascular system. His heart rate was faster than human, about 140 beats per minute at rest. She examined his respiratory system. He breathed through small slits on his neck, as well as a nose-like structure. She documented everything on a tablet, but took no tissue samples, no blood, nothing invasive. "Fascinating," she murmured as she worked. "The physiology is humanoid, but clearly adapted for different conditions. Lower gravity, probably. The bone structure is lighter, more flexible. The eyes, those enormous eyes, suggest evolution on a planet with less light than Earth receives." "Can you tell how old he is?" Hastings asked. Dr. Chen shook her head. "Not without more invasive testing, and I'm not doing that without extensive consultation and proper protocols. But based on cellular structure and general health markers, I'd estimate he's middle-aged for his species, maybe equivalent to a human in their 40s or 50s. "He's been here 40 years, I said. "He was young when he crashed. Early 20s maybe, based on what we could figure out through communication." When the examination finished, Dr. Chen stepped back and spoke directly to Cale. "You're in remarkably good health, all things considered. Mr. Stevens has clearly been taking good care of you." Cale gestured toward me, then made the sign we'd developed for family. "He's saying I'm family," I translated. "That's how he thinks of me, of us. Patricia and I were his family for 40 years. Hastings had been watching all of this with an expression that was hard to read. Finally, he said, "Mr. Stevens, Dr. Chen, Agent Mitchell, please join me in the living room. We need to discuss next steps." In the living room, Hastings laid out the situation with brutal clarity. "Gentlemen, Dr. Chen, we are in unprecedented territory. We have a living extraterrestrial being, clearly intelligent, clearly capable of complex thought and communication. The scientific value is incalculable. The national security implications are enormous, and we have a civilian who's been harboring this being for 4 decades. Protecting, I corrected, not harboring." "The legal distinction is irrelevant," Hastings said. "What matters now is what we do going forward. Dr. Chen, from a scientific standpoint, what do you recommend?" Dr. Chen chose her words carefully. "Kyle is a unique opportunity to learn about extraterrestrial biology, yes, but he's also clearly sapient, conscious, self-aware, capable of complex reasoning and emotional response. Any study must be conducted with his consent and with ethical oversight. Treating him as simply a research subject would be morally unconscionable." "Agent Mitchell," Hastings prompted. "Sir, I've spent the last 18 hours observing Kyle and Mr. Stevens. The relationship is genuine. Kyle isn't being held against his will. This is his home, and Mr. Stevens is his family by any meaningful definition. Moving him to a facility against his will would be problematic, both ethically and practically." Hastings turned to me. "And what do you want, Mr. Stevens?" "I want Cale to be recognized as a person under law. I want him to have the right to decide where he lives, what examinations or studies he consents to, and how he spends his life. I want him to be free, as much as any being can be free when they're the only one of their kind on an entire planet." "That's not possible," Hastings said bluntly. "The moment we acknowledge his existence publicly, this house will be surrounded by media, conspiracy theorists, religious groups, foreign intelligence agencies. His life will become a circus, and U.S. security interests will be compromised." "So what are you proposing?" I asked, dread building in my stomach. A middle ground, Hastings said. Kyle remains here in your custody. His existence remains classified at the highest levels, need to know only. A small team of scientists, cleared and supervised, conducts limited research with his consent. You continue as his guardian, but under federal oversight. We provide resources, protection, medical care, everything needed to ensure his well-being. In exchange, you cooperate fully with approved research and maintain absolute secrecy. I looked at Mitchell and Dr. Chen. Mitchell nodded slightly. It was a better deal than I'd feared. Dr. Chen looked thoughtful. What kind of research? I asked. Non-invasive studies, Dr. Chen said quickly. Communication, cognition, basic biology, nothing that causes harm or distress. I'd oversee it personally, and Cale would have veto power over any procedure. And if he wants to leave, to go outside, to have some kind of life beyond these walls? Hastings frowned. That would be complicated. We'd need security protocols, controlled environments. He's been imprisoned in this house for 40 years, I interrupted. He deserves to at least see the sky without a window between them, to feel the desert sand, to have some semblance of freedom. There was a long silence. Finally, Hastings said, "We'll work something out. Controlled excursions, secure locations. But Mr. Stevens, you need to understand, Cale can never be truly free. His existence is too significant, too sensitive. The best we can offer is a comfortable captivity with people who care about his welfare." It wasn't what I wanted. It wasn't what Cale deserved. But looking around the room at the agents, the scientists, the machinery of government that had descended on my home, I realized it was probably the best deal we were going to get. "I need to discuss this with Cale," I said. "It's his decision, not mine." Back in his room, I explained the proposal as clearly as I could. Kyle listened, those enormous dark eyes fixed on my face, processing information that would determine the rest of his life. "What do you want?" I asked him finally. "Not what's practical, not what they're offering. What do you actually want?" Cale was quiet for a long moment. Then he vocalized slowly, carefully. "Want home, want sky, want..." He gestured in a way that encompassed everything beyond the walls. "Want belong." "I know," I said, my throat tight. "I know you do. But your home is gone, and this planet isn't ready to accept you as one of its own. So we have to work with what's possible." Cale touched my hand with those long fingers. "You protect 40 years. Trust, you choose what? Safe." "No," I said firmly, "I won't make this choice for you. You're a person, Cale. This has to be your decision." He thought for a long time, looking out the window at the desert he'd observed, but never walked through. Finally, he nodded. "Stay," he vocalized. "Here, with Ryan. Safe." I felt relief and sadness in equal measure. Relief that he wouldn't be taken away, that our life together could continue. Sadness that after 40 years of hiding, he was choosing continued captivity because freedom simply wasn't an option for someone like him. "Okay," I said, "then we'll make this work. Together, like we always have." Director Hastings accepted Cale's decision with professional satisfaction, already making arrangements for what he called Project Haven, a classified program that would oversee Cale's care and study while maintaining absolute secrecy. The house would be retrofitted with security measures. A small team of cleared personnel would rotate through for research. My life, already constrained by 40 years of secrecy, would now be monitored and controlled by the federal government. But Cole would be safe. He'd be home. And after 4 decades of protecting him alone, I'd finally have help bearing the weight of this impossible secret. As the day ended and the official machinery began to turn, I sat with Kyle and watched the sunset through his window, painting the New Mexico sky in shades of orange and red. 40 years ago, I'd made a choice to save a life. Now I was making another choice, to trust that the world had changed enough to protect that life, even if it couldn't yet fully accept it. Whether I was right remained to be seen. December 1995 brought changes that transformed my home from a private sanctuary into something closer to a classified research facility. The government worked quickly. Within 2 weeks, my property had been retrofitted with security systems, surveillance equipment, and what Agent Mitchell called discrete perimeter monitoring. To any casual observer, my house looked the same. But now, unmarked vehicles rotated through the empty field behind the property every 12 hours, and cameras hidden in seemingly ordinary fixtures monitored every entrance. The research team arrived on December 10th. Dr. Sarah Chen led it, accompanied by 3 others: Dr. Marcus Webb, a linguist from MIT, Dr. Jennifer Parsons, a cognitive psychologist from Stanford, and Dr. James Rodriguez, a physicist who specialized in exotic propulsion systems. All had top-secret clearances. All had been extensively briefed, and all had signed documents that made them legally responsible for Cale's welfare. "We're not here to treat him as a lab specimen," Dr. Chen told me that first morning as we gathered in my living room that had been converted into a makeshift research center. "We're here to understand him as a person, to learn from him with his consent, and to document what might be humanity's only chance to understand an extraterrestrial intelligence." Cale watched from the hallway, observing these new people who would become fixtures in our lives. I could see the tension in his posture. 40 years of hiding had not prepared him for suddenly being the center of attention, even respectful attention. "Cale," I said gently, "would you like to meet them, or would you prefer to wait?" He considered, then slowly entered the room. The scientists fell silent, and I saw the moment of awe on their faces, the realization that they were in the presence of something that shouldn't exist, according to everything humanity believed about its place in the universe. Dr. Webb spoke first, his voice soft. "Hello, Kyle. I'm Marcus. I study language, how beings communicate with each other. I'd like to learn how you communicate, if you're willing to teach me." Cale looked at me, and I nodded encouragingly. He turned back to Dr. Webb and vocalized carefully. "Teach? Yes. Learn. Also, from you." "He wants to learn from you too," I translated. "Cale's been isolated for 4 decades, with only Patricia and me for human contact. He's curious about the world, about people, about everything he's had to observe from a distance." Dr. Parsons leaned forward, her notebook ready. "Cale, may I ask, do you miss your home, your people?" It was a question I'd avoided asking directly, not wanting to cause pain. But Cale answered immediately, his gestures supplementing his limited vocalization. "Yes, miss, always, but..." He touched his chest, then pointed to me, then made a sweeping gesture around the house. "This, also, home, different but real. Home isn't just a place," Dr. Chen observed quietly. "It's where you feel safe, where you belong. Cale's made a home here because Mr. Stevens made that possible." The first weeks of Project Haven fell into a routine. The scientists would arrive each morning, spend several hours with Cale conducting their studies, then leave before dark. They asked questions, recorded responses, documented everything. Dr. Webb worked on understanding Cale's native language, a complex system of clicks, whistles, and tones that his vocal apparatus produced naturally, but that human throats couldn't replicate. Dr. Parsons conducted cognitive tests that proved Cale's intelligence was not only comparable to human intelligence, but exceeded it in certain areas, particularly pattern recognition and 3-dimensional spatial reasoning. Dr. Rodriguez was fascinated by Cale's descriptions of the crashed craft and the propulsion system he'd been operating. Though Cale couldn't replicate the technology, he was a pilot, not an engineer, his explanations of how the craft manipulated gravitational fields were apparently revolutionary. I watched Rodriguez fill notebook after notebook with equations and diagrams, occasionally muttering "impossible" under his breath, while writing down information that suggested it wasn't impossible at all. But the breakthrough came from Dr. Chen, and it wasn't scientific. It was human. On December 28th, she arrived early, before the others. I found her in the kitchen, looking troubled. "Dr. Chen," I asked, "everything all right?" "Ryan, may I call you Ryan?" At my nod, she continued, "I've been thinking about Cale's psychological well-being. We're learning so much from him, documenting his physiology and cognition, but we're not addressing what he actually needs as a person." "What do you mean?" "He's been in this house for 40 years. The same rooms, the same walls, the same limited view of the world. That kind of confinement, it would destroy a human psychologically. How has it not destroyed him?" I thought about Patricia, about the books we'd brought home, the television programs we'd watched together, the games we'd played. We tried to give him enrichment, variety within the constraints we had. "But he's never felt the sun on his skin," Dr. Chen said, "never walked on open ground, never had a conversation with anyone except you and your late wife. Ryan, we need to give him more than safety. We need to give him life." I felt something shift in my chest, hope maybe, or the beginning of it. "What are you proposing?" "Director Hastings promised controlled excursions. Let's make that happen. There are places, remote, secure, where Cale could experience something beyond these walls. And I think we need to expand his social contact, not just us researchers, but other people. Carefully selected, properly cleared, but people." "Hastings will never approve that," I said. "Too much risk." "Then we make it low risk," Dr. Chen insisted. "We start small. We prove it can be done safely. Because, Ryan, I've been watching Cale, and I see something I recognize from working with captive primates. He's coping, yes. But he's not thriving, and if we keep him confined indefinitely, we're no better than the people you were protecting him from 40 years ago." She was right, and I knew it. I'd been so focused on keeping Cale safe that I'd never fully addressed the prison I'd inadvertently created for him. That afternoon, Dr. Chen presented her proposal to the team. To my surprise, they all agreed immediately. Dr. Webb and Dr. Parsons had both been thinking along similar lines. Even Dr. Rodriguez, whose primary interest was the crashed crafts technology, acknowledged that Cale's mental health was paramount. The challenge was convincing Hastings. It took 3 weeks of documentation, proposals, risk assessments, and security protocols. But finally, on January 18, 1996, Director Hastings approved a trial excursion. Location: White Sands National Monument, a restricted section closed to the public at night with full security detail. I told Kyle that evening. "How would you feel about going outside? Really outside, not just the backyard, but out into the desert?" His reaction was immediate and visceral. He stood up from his chair, his hands trembling slightly. "Outside? Desert? Really?" "Really, tomorrow night. Dr. Chen arranged it, if you want to go." "Want," he said emphatically, more emotion in his voice than I'd heard in years. "Want, see, sky, touch, ground, feel, wind." The next night we drove to White Sands in a convoy of 3 vehicles. I rode with Kyle in a modified van with tinted windows. He sat pressed against the glass, watching the landscape pass by. The first time he'd seen the world in motion since that night in 1955 when I'd driven him home wrapped in a blanket. White Sands at night was otherworldly, endless dunes of gypsum sand glowing pale under starlight, more stars than you could count stretching across the vast desert sky. We parked in a restricted area, far from any roads or trails, surrounded by security, but also by emptiness. "Are you ready, Doctor?" Chen asked Kyle gently. He nodded, his enormous eyes reflecting the starlight. I opened the van door, and Cale stepped out onto Earth's surface for the first time in 40 years. He stood perfectly still for a long moment, and I saw his body react to the experience. The way he tilted his face up toward the sky, the way he slowly knelt and placed his hands on the sand, the soft sounds he made that might have been his species' equivalent of tears or laughter or both. Then he began to walk, slowly at first, then faster, his movements becoming more confident. He ran his hands through the sand, picked it up and let it fall through his fingers, lay down on his back, and stared up at the stars that had been his home before they became his prison. Dr. Chen stood beside me, watching. "Look at him," she whispered. "That's not a research subject. That's a person experiencing joy." We stayed for 2 hours. Cale explored, touched everything, examined plants and rocks with the curiosity of a scientist and the wonder of a child. The security team maintained their perimeter, but they too seemed moved by what they were witnessing. As we prepared to leave, Cale approached me. "Thank you," he vocalized. "Thank you, Ryan. Thank Dr. Chen. Thank all." "You're welcome," I said, my throat tight. "We'll do this again as often as we can." Driving home, Cale pressed his hands against the window, trying to hold on to every moment of freedom for as long as possible. I realized then that Dr. Chen had been right. Safety wasn't enough. Cale needed more than protection. He needed a life worth living. The excursions became monthly events, then weekly. Always at night, always in remote locations, but regular enough that Cale began to learn the desert he'd only observed from my windows for 4 decades. He learned the names of plants, of rocks, of the few animals we encountered. He collected samples, arranged them in his room, created a small museum of a world he was finally being allowed to explore. The research team expanded too, carefully, slowly, but meaningfully. A medical doctor joined to ensure Cale's health. A botanist came when we discovered Cale's fascination with plants. Each new person was vetted extensively, but each brought something valuable into Cale's life: conversation, knowledge, the simple humanity of social interaction. By March 1996, Project Haven had transformed from a containment operation into something closer to a community. A small group of people dedicated not just to studying Cale, but to ensuring his well-being and, as much as possible, his happiness. Director Hastings visited in early April, his first return since establishing the project. I watched him observe Cale interacting with Dr. Webb over a language lesson, both of them laughing at a particularly difficult translation, and I saw something change in Hastings's expression. "This isn't what I expected," he admitted to me privately. "I thought we'd be running a research facility. Instead, we're, providing social services for an extraterrestrial?" "We're giving him a life," I said. "Isn't that what any conscious being deserves?" Hastings didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, "Your 40 years of protection. I'm starting to understand it wasn't just about hiding him. It was about preserving his dignity." "Yes," I said simply. "We'll continue the program," Hastings decided. "Expand it even. But Ryan, you need to understand. This can't last forever. Cale is 65 years old now, by your estimation. You're 65. Dr. Chen is 43. Eventually, the people who remember why we're doing this, who see Cale as a person rather than a project, will be gone. What happens then?" It was a question I didn't have an answer for. But as I watched Cale examine a desert flower with Dr. Chen, both of them animated and engaged, I realized that maybe that was a problem for another day. For now, after 40 years of hiding, Cale was finally living, and that was enough. June 1996 brought an unexpected visitor to my door, a young woman in her late 20s with a government ID and an earnest expression that reminded me of myself 40 years earlier. "Mr. Stevens, I'm Rebecca Torres, just assigned to Project Haven as Dr. Chen's research assistant. She said I should introduce myself to you first, out of respect for everything." I invited her in, studying her as she entered. She had the nervous energy of someone who'd been briefed on something extraordinary but hadn't yet experienced it firsthand. "Cale's in the back room with Dr. Webb," I told her. "They're working on translation of what Cale says are star charts, his attempt to show us where his home world might be relative to Earth." "That must be amazing," Rebecca said, then hesitated. "Mr. Stevens, can I ask you something? How did you do it? 40 years of hiding him, protecting him, never telling anyone. I can't imagine that kind of discipline. It wasn't discipline, I said. It was love. When you care about someone, protecting them isn't a burden. It's just what you do. We walked to the back room where Cale was gesturing animatedly at a star chart Dr. Webb had printed. When Kyle saw Rebecca, he paused, and I saw the familiar wariness in his posture. Each new person was still an unknown quantity, a potential threat. "Kyle," I said gently, "this is Rebecca. She's going to be working with Dr. Chen." "Rebecca, this is Cale." Rebecca approached slowly, and I appreciated that she didn't treat the moment casually. "Hello, Cale. It's an honor to meet you." Cale studied her for a moment, then vocalized carefully, "Well, come, Rebecca. You help Dr. Chen?" "Yes," Rebecca said, her voice catching slightly. "I'll be helping with the medical monitoring and documentation." "Good," Cale said, then returned his attention to the star charts, a gesture that Dr. Webb and I had learned meant he was comfortable enough with the new person to continue his work. Rebecca would later tell me that moment changed her life, realizing that Cale wasn't just an extraordinary discovery, but a person with preferences, boundaries, and the agency to accept or reject new people in his life. Over the following months, Project Haven continued to evolve. The team had grown to 8 regular members, each bringing specialized knowledge, but also genuine affection for Cale. They celebrated his birthday, or rather, the anniversary of the crash, since we didn't know his actual birth date, with a cake that Dr. Chen had carefully researched to match Cale's dietary needs. I watched him blow out candles, his method awkward but determined, and I thought about how far we'd come from that terrified being I'd found in a crashed craft 41 years ago. But I also felt time pressing against me. I was 66 now, and my body was reminding me daily that I wasn't young anymore. My heart medication had been adjusted twice that year. I tired more easily. And I worried constantly about what would happen to Cale when I was gone. In September, I approached Dr. Chen with a proposal. We were sitting in my kitchen, drinking coffee while Kyle napped, something he did more frequently now, his own aging process evident in his slowing movements. "Sarah," I said, "I need to talk to you about succession planning." She looked up, understanding immediately. "Ryan, you're not..." "I'm 66 and Cale is approximately 66 by our estimates. Neither of us is going to live forever, and when I'm gone, someone needs to be Cale's advocate. Someone who sees him as a person first, a research subject distant second." "You want me to take that role?" she said quietly. "I want to ask if you would, legally through Project Haven, make you his official guardian if something happens to me. Someone who will fight for his welfare, who will remember that he's not government property, but a person who deserves dignity." Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment. "That's a significant responsibility." "Yes," I agreed. "It is. It's the responsibility I've carried for 41 years, and I'm asking you to carry it after me." "I'll do it," she said, without further hesitation. "Cale deserves someone who will protect him the way you have. I'll make sure he's never treated as just a specimen." We formalized the arrangement through Director Hastings, who'd become something of an ally over the months. Legal documents were drawn up, establishing Dr. Chen as Cale's secondary guardian with full authority over his welfare should I become incapacitated or die. October brought the moment I'd been dreading. I had a heart attack, minor, treatable, but a stark reminder of mortality. I spent 3 days in the hospital in Albuquerque, and Dr. Chen stayed with Kyle, reassuring him, explaining what was happening. When I returned home, Kyle was waiting at the door. He touched my face gently, his expression worried. "Ryan, old, like me. Time, short." "Yes," I admitted, "for both of us. But Kyle, I need you to understand when I'm gone, you won't be alone. Sarah will take care of you. The team will stay. You'll be safe." "Not same," he vocalized. "You first. You save me. You family. And you're my family, I said, my voice breaking. You've been my family for 41 years. That doesn't end just because I do. We stood there together, two beings from different worlds who'd found in each other something that transcended species: companionship, trust, love. November 1996 marked 41 years since the crash, and Project Haven organized a small ceremony, not celebrating the crash, but acknowledging the anniversary of Cale's arrival on Earth. The team gathered, and even Director Hastings attended via video link. 41 years ago, Mr. Stevens made a choice that changed his life, Hastings said from the screen. He chose compassion over protocol, protection over career. And in doing so, he's given us something invaluable. Not just scientific knowledge, but an example of what humanity can be at its best. Cale stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder. He'd prepared something, worked on it for weeks with Dr. Webb's help. Now with the whole team watching, he vocalized more clearly than I'd ever heard him speak. 41 years ago, I crash. Scared, hurt, alone. Ryan, find me. Ryan, save me. Not report, not tell, just help protect for 41 years. Ryan, teach me what human can be: kind, brave, family. He paused, struggling with emotion. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you. All Earth, not home, but you make home possible. Bonus. There wasn't a dry eye in the room, including mine. As 1996 drew to a close, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. From a terrified decision in the desert to a classified federal project, from absolute secrecy to a small but dedicated community, from hiding to something approaching life. Kyle would never go home. His world was too far away, his craft too damaged, the technology to return beyond both human and his capability. But he had a home here, on this strange planet, among these strange beings who had learned to see him not as alien, but as person. I didn't know how much time I had left. Months, maybe a year or two if I was lucky. But I knew Cale would be cared for. Dr. Chen would keep her promise. The team would continue, and maybe someday humanity would be ready to acknowledge his existence publicly, to welcome him as Earth's first citizen from another world. For now, though, we had this: quiet evenings watching the sunset over the New Mexico desert, research sessions that felt more like conversations between friends, monthly excursions under starlit skies, and the simple daily routine of two elderly beings, one human, one not, living out their days together. 41 years ago, I'd saved a life. In doing so, he'd saved mine, too, giving it purpose, meaning, and a family I never expected. Whatever time we had left, we'd face it together. And when I was gone, the legacy would continue, not just in scientific papers or classified files, but in the hearts of the people who'd learned that family transcends species, that compassion knows no boundaries, and that sometimes the most human thing you can do is protect someone who isn't human at all. The secret was no longer just mine. It belonged to all of us now. And Cale, after 41 years of hiding, was finally truly home.